Hello everyone and welcome to Season 7, Episode 36 of Pro Wrestling's Top 50. I'm your host Travis McNeil, and today we continue our countdown of the top 50 matches in CHIKARA history with match number 15 on our list, which is the Torneo Cibernetico between Team Gerard of course, STIGMA, Ophidian, Amasis, Kingston, UltraMantis Black, Crossbones, and Lince Dorado against Team Equinox of Jimmy Equinox Olsen, Mike Quackenbush, Tim Donst, Hydra, Helios, and the colony of Soldier Ant, Fire Ant, and Worker Ant from the CHIKARA Cibernetico Begins event held on November the 15th of 2008. This is the longest match on this countdown. The Torneo Cibernetico, we've talked about it a little bit. I believe I discussed it a little bit in the introduction for this season, as the Cibernetico that was held in 2004, to me, was kind of the match that, really started to get a lot of interest and a lot of buzz in CHIKARA. I had seen some, clips online. There was an angle where the wild cards, unmasked Gran Akuma and made kids cry and things like that. And that's where I, really started to get interested in CHIKARA. Prior to that, I'd seen some coverage of it in, the After magazines, Pro Wrestling Illustrated, talking about Invaders Weekend and the debut show. And I had always known who Mike Quackenbush was, because of those magazines as well. I was an independent wrestling fan before I'd even seen any Northeast independent wrestling, just, following along through the magazines. But it was 2004. It was the Cibernetico cometh. I talked about this as well, that the Cibernetico, a traditional lucha libre match, the one that CMLL had in 1997, was a very big tape trading match at the time. When I first got on the internet in the early 2000s, just having all of this exposure to this wide world of wrestling and getting into tape trading, you would have a list like the Death Valley Driver video reviews, top lucha matches of the 90s, and that was always right there at the top of the list. So that was a match, tape traders sought out. So having, that legendary Cibernetico and then having a US independence version of it was very, very cool. I love that initial Cibernetico match. It is a very ambitious match, considering that it is Quack and, 15 of his students that at the time, were various experience levels, some of them very, very new, but it had a fun little story throughout it. Sweet and Sour, Larry Sweeney at the centerpiece of that. It was a really cool match. Maybe it doesn't blow you away, watching it now, almost 20 years later, but it was really neat at the time. And again, kind of kicked off CHIKARA leading into King of Trios 2005, which was, the time period that I thought CHIKARA really established its spot as being one of the top independent promotions. There's been, a Cibernetico pretty much every year since that point for CHIKARA. Most of them really, really good watches. This 2008 one, though, of the long-form CHIKARA matches, there's a little spoiler for you if you can read between the lines. This one is the one that I feel was the best. The 2005 one, which goes almost like 105 minutes, gets a lot of hype between the Kings of Wrestling and Quackenbush and friends. Really great match, but that one I always felt a little bit long. This match here, it goes, 75 plus minutes, and it flies by. At no point to me does this match feel long whatsoever, which is a great testament, as always, to when a match is of an extended runtime. The story in this match I really, really love as well, because although this match focuses on the feud between Gerard and Jimmy Equinox Olsen, we've talked about their feud. We mentioned their ladder match at Revelation X in 2009 earlier on in this countdown. Although they are the team captains and they have that simmering rivalry, that takes a little bit of a back seat in this match. And I really, really appreciate that in hindsight. Normally, the Cibernetico, it's the main event of a CHIKARA weekend. It's this big match, it can be used to settle rivalries or, a lot of things like that. But here, this match was on the first night of a CHIKARA double shot weekend, and it was all about advancing, this feud, giving the crowd a taste of it, and also advancing a lot of other angles and setting up matches for the following night. Which again, a unique way to use the Cibernetico by almost making it a hype match as opposed to a big match itself, but it really, really worked here. And what I really love about this match is the internal story that they have with Lince Dorado. Lince Dorado is really interesting to me in CHIKARA history, because he's a wrestler that when he was pushed really, really hard through 2007, a lot of the crowd, almost resented him in a way, really didn't get behind him the way that, I think CHIKARA wanted, their audience to. And I feel like that's, always a reflection on Lince as opposed to a reflection of CHIKARA, not reading what their audience wanted and trying to force someone down their throats. Because when Lince wasn't a focal point, I really, really enjoyed him. And in this match, like I said, he is not the focal point per se. It's that Equinox and Vin rivalry, but he has his own story throughout this match that I feel kind of carries it and is really, really intriguing. And he's a guy, that during his run of the BDK would have a lot of memorable matches, primarily his Young Lions Cup final with Frightmare. He's a dude that, would get his WWE run, now was back on the indies, has a weird gimmick where I guess he, smokes pot, which, all power to him, I guess. But, he's someone that I feel, will never get the notoriety. I don't even necessarily want to say that he deserves, in a way, but, I feel like he's better than a lot of people, remember him as being from this time period, because they think back, to the Shooting Star Senton gone wrong, against Mitch Ryder, in that scary moment, and, the feud with Kingston where the crowd just really didn't get behind him, and, some of the messy matches where he was, teamed with all of these luchadors, coming over from Mexico that, didn't really gel with their American CHIKARA counterparts. But this match, he's a little bit of a gem in here. So basically the story is that both Jimmy Equinox Olsen and Lince Dorado, they were paired together randomly. CHIKARA did a lethal lottery style tournament. They ended up winning, accumulating 3 points, and being, scheduled for tag team title shot against the Osirian Portal, which they would get the night following this Cibernetico. So to kind of mess with Jimmy, Equinox Olsen, as Vin was feuding with him, Vin chose Lince Dorado as a member of his Cibernetico team. It kind of came out of nowhere, and it was really just this head game to try to create dissension in that team, so they would ultimately end up losing their bid to win the tag team titles, and it was just one more way that Vin could mess with Jimmy Olsen. So the story we get here is Lince kind of being the odd man out on his team. It's a Cibernetico. I think in a way Ciberneticos are really kind of easy, in that, they shouldn't feel boring. I kind of, compare it akin to like a Royal Rumble match where you constantly have somebody new coming in, so it's always at least somewhat fresh. You can't really get bored throughout it. Same thing with the Cibernetico match. So if you're unfamiliar, both teams have a batting order. So they kind of choose the order that the 8 wrestlers on either side will compete in. They come in one at a time. It's, lucha tag rules, and you have to stick to that batting order. So when it's your time to come in, you have to come in. So it creates, this early period where you get everybody from each team, cycling through the batting order a couple times and mixing it up with both their counterparts on the opposing team's batting order, but then it always, somebody will stay in, 2 cycles, and then you'll be able to run through, and you get all of these fresh matches throughout it, which is really, really cool. So we get all of that here. Another thing that I really like about this particular Cibernetico is you have eliminations scattered throughout it. So again, it constantly keeps it exciting that, you have these advantages where the heels are up, or you get, these eliminations all along the way. And you also get a lot of really good near falls in this match too, which you don't always get in a match like a Cibernetico or Survivor Series match. It's, somebody comes in, hits their big move or their finish, wrestler gets eliminated, back to square one. But you don't get that here. You get falls being broken up and good stuff like that. During the early period, the only thing that I really thought stood out to me as kind of being a surprise was Tim Donst and Ophidian had a sequence. They actually ended up in the ring twice together during that early period, and they had a really, really good chemistry. They did some just really cool stuff on the mat, and Tim, used his size and power advantage against Ophidian, who's a smaller wrestler, really well. They did this awesome sequence where Ophidian was kind of going for like a Yoshi Tonic or a Code Red, and Tim kind of popped him back up by the legs, almost like he was going to take him over into a Mad Scientist bomb, but instead hooked him for a backslide. It was just really, really neat. And again, one of those things that I wasn't really expecting, when I watched this match through. So to the point that I made a note of it on my notes, way back when I watched this to prepare for the countdown. So like I said, this story here is, Gerard avoiding Equinox, the ghost of his past. They are the team captains. They started the match, and of course, Vin immediately bails to put him to the back of the batting order. So, just really good stuff there. And in fact, we don't really get, the two team captains mixing it up until about an hour into the match. And even then, it's such a tease, which is good. We know these guys would wrestle again. We know, they ended up having that ladder match that I mentioned. So they didn't, do too much here, which I really, really liked watching this match in hindsight. We get the story with Lince where, he comes in and he's tentative, being on the other team. He's really worried about potentially fighting Equinox. Will that dissolve their team? They need to be on the same page to try to win the tag team titles. There's also a moment where Lince comes in and he's, about to wrestle his trainer, Mike Quackenbush, and he instead decides to tag out. He doesn't want to wrestle his trainer, someone he has so much respect for. We get, a lot of just good work with everybody in there. We get dives kind of littered throughout this match, which again, I really like because it's, you get an exciting dive and it kind of keeps you into things as opposed to just a big dive sequence. The building that they ran in was really cool because they actually had like the doors that would lead into like a hallway, and that's where the wrestlers would enter through. But it was close enough to the ring that when these guys would do dives, the wrestler that's catching the dive could bump through the door, and it looked really cool. Like there's a moment where Jimmy Olsen hits like a tope into an arm drag on STIGMA, and STIGMA like flies right through the door, right out of camera shot, which was really, really neat. Like I said, though, the eliminations in this match, they're scattered throughout. Tim Donst is the first one eliminated. He, has UltraMantis Black and a Fireman's Carry. They have history. That's the other thing, too. I'm not going to get into all the history of this match. But all of these guys, have storyline reasons to be beefing with each other. So that, the teams chosen were really, really good in that regard. But Donst gets distracted by UltraMantis' partner Crossbones in the Order of the Neo Solar Temple, and Mantis is able to crucifix him for 3 and eliminate him. And then we got to get a quick follow-up where Crossbones himself ends up getting eliminated. He misses a big, like, Superfly splash from the top, which is really impressive. He's a big dude. Think like Bronson Reed coming off with his Superfly splash. And he gets hit with a standing moonsault from Helios, otherwise known as Ricochet, to put him out. And that's kind of just like, we got these 2 eliminations about a half hour into the match, and then it gets cooled off, right? So you don't get these rapid fire eliminations that you sort of see in these matches quite a bit. After the first pair of eliminations, though, something that I really liked is the faces really start to push the pace in this match. So, normally you get a heel that bails and it gives a quick little reset while the next heel comes in, and it allows, these guys to basically like set their defense and know how they're coming into the match. But here, we got this sequence where, a heel will bail out to the floor and the babyface will like take him out with a dive. Then that way, it forces the tag under Lucha Tag. So a new face is able to come in and take out the new heel that comes in and just really push that pace, which is good stuff. We get just really fun dives, like I said. At one point, Helios hits a big space flying tiger drop, which was great. STIGMA gets a really good run in this match. I'm not going to go through every elimination as it happens, but he ends up putting away multiple guys with his tombstone, which I believe was called the Stigmata at the time. So he puts away Hydra for it for, an elimination about 40 minutes or so into the match. He ends up later on putting Worker out with the tombstone. We get, a bunch of eliminations on both sides, but we get to a period that I really, really like where we focus on the rivalry between Mike Quackenbush and STIGMA. So STIGMA is the former Shane Storm. He had traded the counter of the CHIKARA special to UltraMantis Black to allow UltraMantis Black to use the Eye of Tyr on Hydra to give Shane Storm a much-needed win. Of course, UltraMantis Black then traded the CHIKARA special counter to Chris Hero. We've talked about this, very important in CHIKARA lore, if you want to call it that. So Mike Quackenbush, I guess turned on Shane Storm per se, even though it was Shane Storm that did, this kind of dastardly deed behind the scenes, dissolved their partnership when they had 3 points. and it led to, you know, a bitter rivalry between the two. So there's a moment in this match where they finally get in the ring together, and Quack just, you know, pulverizes Stigma and starts to systematically, you know, take him apart, and tries to put him in the CHIKARA special, and Stigma's able to get out to the floor. But immediately after this, Lince tags in, and this time he tries to bring the fight to Quackenbush. And I love just the subtlety of it. You know, commentary doesn't pick up on it. It's really just for the viewer to read into, should they choose. But you have Lince, who was trained by Quack, that, you know, didn't want to fight him, but then you just had, you know, Lince have to sit on the apron, and even though he's no fan of Stigma, you know, you see him get brutalized by the man that trained him, and it just kind of, you know, maybe puts that seed of doubt in Lince's mind of like, you know, could my trainer potentially do this to me someday? You know, what if I made a mistake? What if I did something wrong? You know, would I take a beating like that? And so he brings the fight to Quack, which is really, really good. Stigma, you know, like I said, he gets this great run in this match of all these eliminations with the tombstone, and he's also able to put Quack away with it, which I really, really liked. Quack, you know, he kind of focuses on, you know, this hatred for Stigma. He couldn't get him in the CHIKARA special. When he finally did, Stigma countered out of it, you know, obviously knowing the counter, so that was a great little callback. But Quack ends up, you know, letting his rage get the best of him, and he goes for the Quacken Driver 2, which is like a disgusting cross-legged sit-out tombstone pile driver. And Mike Quackenbush is this wrestler that, you know, always, you know, prides himself on being this, you know, this maestro, right? This, you know, chess game wrestler where he can, you know, lay out a plan and think so many steps ahead of his opponent, but he lets his blind rage get to him, you know, not thinking if I try to tombstone Stigma, he could easily counter out into his own tombstone that's been so successful for, you know, for him throughout the match. And that's exactly what happens. And it's a really big win for Stigma, taking Quack out. Something that I also liked about this match, you know, I talk about the teases between, you know, Jimmy Olsen and Vin Gerard. They finally link it up about 60 minutes in. Vin, you know, becomes, again, you know, we talk about that blind rage, you know, incensed in going after the mask of Equinox. And while he's doing that, you know, Equinox is able to get to the floor, and it allows Vin to get rolled up by a worker ant for a really surprise 3. You know, the team captain gets eliminated, you know, 2/3, you know, of the way through the match, which was really surprising. And worker ant had a Young Lions Cup opportunity lined up against Vin for the next night. So gives him, you know, that pinfall over the champion, you know, putting that doubt in mind of, you know, could worker ant potentially become the Young Lions Cup winner the following night, which was really, really good. As we kind of get into the finishing, you know, period here, we get this moment, you know, where Fire Ant, you know, he gets to look really resilient and survives a beatdown from Eddie Kingston and is able to roll him up. After doing that, you know, Eddie Kingston lays him out with the back fist of the future. That causes, you know, Lince Dorado, who's got a lot of bad blood in history with Eddie Kingston, to come in and basically, you know, chastise Kingston for attacking someone after the bell. Kingston lays him out with the back fist of the future. He falls on top of Fire Ant, which gives him the 3. And then it leads to this moment where poor Jimmy Olsen has to decide what to do. Is he going to let Lince Dorado recover, which is the right thing to do? Or, you know, is he going to avoid trying to fight his friend and tag team partner and just pin him while he's laid out? And that's exactly what he does. And it kind of, you know, again, puts that seed of you know, betrayal in the mind of Lince Dorado of, you know, this guy took the easy way out. You know, I get that we didn't want to fight each other, but he cost me my moment in the Cibernetico, you know, to go ahead and do that. I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about the injury to Amasis in this match. So partway through the match, Amasis, one half of the Campeonatos de Parejas of the Osirian portal. At that point, he gets eliminated by Mike Quackenbush, who counters a roll-up, like sits down on the roll-up and is able to pin him. He, you know, protests the 3 count after that, and Quack ends up bandering him to the floor, and he actually lands really awkwardly on his ankle and would severely injure his ankle, putting him out of action for a couple of months. And, you know, just screams when he lands on that ankle. And it's so weird watching it back in hindsight, because this was a freak accident injury that occurred on a needless move, like after the elimination, right? You know, Amasis could have just went to the back, but, you know, they did this Bandera spot, which should have been, you know, nice and simple. And he landed weird, and just with the screams when he lands, it almost, you know, seems theatrical, like it's fake. But it was 100% legitimate, and thankfully he would heal up and be back in action, you know, 2 months later. So our final two for this match ends up being Equinox and Ophidian. They have a nice little run at the end. Equinox is able to survive the Ophidian death grip, which Ophidian was able to use earlier in the match to eliminate Soldier Ant. He ends up countering it into an overbomb and then locks in the CHIKARA special for the submission, which again was perfect because it sets up the tag title defense for the next night, which ultimately the Osirian portal with Escorpion y Hipsico filling in for Amasis, who, as I mentioned, was injured. They would end up retaining the titles over Jimmy and Lince, but a really fun match that one was, if I remember correctly. But this was great, though. It gives Jimmy Olsen that big win, and again, contributes to that story of him being more successful as Equinox than Gerard ever was while he donned the mask. Now he's won a Cibernetico, and he would ultimately go on to win the Young Lions Cup in that latter match. This match, though, it is long. It flies by. It's a great little time capsule for 2008 in CHIKARA. It's got, all of the top students, a couple import-ish guys, whether you consider Ricochet a CHIKARA guy or not, I don't know, that's up to you. It's just a really good match. Tons of fun sequences, a great story all the way through. It flies by. It is my second favorite Cibernetico match of all time, and it's one that I feel is really overlooked because of, like I said, it wasn't this big time, main event that was built to throughout the year. It was a piece of a puzzle of many other rivalries. You can watch this one, of course, on independentwrestling.tv. Subscribe to my channel here on YouTube so that you never miss a video. Follow me on Instagram and Twitter at Wrestling50. And please join me again next time as we continue to count down Pro Wrestling's Top 50.